Hello everybody. If you've got a General Motors rear-wheel drive car and you're going to either rebuild or put a new rear axle in that car and you want to understand the differences between the majority of the major General Motors axles, I've got an interview with somebody that's been working on these things for over 27 years. This is a Chevy 12-bolt axle here. And I am in Pennsylvania picking my axle up from Brian Trick, who just got done rebuilding it. Even though this is far from ideal conditions to shoot a video, we're going to teach you a few things about Chevrolet rear ends. Okay, so let's go. All right, look at this thing. This thing's gorgeous. Looks nothing like when I dropped it off to you a few weeks ago. Now, just on the surface, I'll talk about it. This is a Chevy 12-bolt, which is basically the strongest passenger car axle they made, right, Brian?
Correct.
Okay, first of all, you're Brian Trick. We're in Erie, Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
correct? And you know a lot about axles, right?
I know a few things about axles.
How many of these things have you built?
I have built over 2,000 of these things.
Oh my Lord.
In the past 27 years.
Wow, I didn't know you did that many. I know you're known all over the Oldsmobile forums as the guy. I didn't shop, I didn't question, I looked for you.
Yeah.
It's silver, it's not actually aluminum though, right? So this is made to look like, at least, the Oldsmobile 12-bolt aluminum center section W27, is that what it was called?
Correct.
And it does have a W27 look-alike cover, right?
Correct.
Made for Chevrolet. I am astounded at how much I don't know about these things. I don't even know where to start. You're holding an axle, one is in. You want to talk about what we started with and maybe just start with the housing?
Well, we started, if you can come down here to this one that's never been modified, we started with a typical C-clip 12-bolt Chevy rear. We cut the ends completely off. I put everything in a jig. When it's in the jig with the bar and puck, we weld the tubes, and then I weld
the tubes. This is the tube welded right there. We see this welding was not there. You can see it doesn't exist on that housing.
Right.
Pretty awesome. It's only held in, you said, with a plug weld, right? I think that's it right there, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And also before you weld, I use a Moser 7900 end for a big bearing. I cut the shock mount right here to allow me to get the welder around for the new end, but I also then I fabricate and put the shock mount behind the lower control arm.
And it took me a minute to understand what you're talking about. If you want to scoot to your right, so we're out of the light, you can see where there is if you want to point that gap out there.
There's your typical gap here.
Here.
And now I've moved it directly behind the lower control arm, much beefier mount. You can still run your typical traditional shock, or if you want to run coilovers, however you want to do it.
That's awesome. And you also said it changes the angle of the rear shocks a little bit, right?
Yes, if you're running a traditional shock, it takes some of the angle off the shock, lets the shock work better.
So the shock, you said, is not so vertical. It's not so splayed.
It's not so angled. It's a little more up and down. It favors more vertical, which can help in your 60 foots, stuff like that.
Wow.
Yes.
That's awesome. It's that little loopy there.
This here is if you want to convert to rear disc brakes,
which you know I will.
Your caliper hose is going to go here. Your hard lines goes there. They meet right there.
That's awesome.
It's just one of those things. If you got the welder out, plan ahead.
Right.
So it's there.
And there's this housing end you're talking about. Thing's massive.
Yes, this is a Moser 7900 end. Takes a big forward bearing or a Timken set 20. I prefer the Timken set 20 simply because it's a tapered bearing. And this is going to be a street car that's going to take side loads from cornering and all that.
And tapered bearing, correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying there's three kinds, right? There's a ball bearing, which just has round balls in it.
Yes.
But the roller bearing has rollers. But the tapered roller bearing is when the rollers are at an angle to take side loads.
It's like some people say, it's a cup and a cone.
Okay.
Yes.
Now that makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
Because I've got wide tires on my car when I'm flinging around corners.
Yes.
Now, could you talk about how you had to do this differently because this is a 67 rear end?
Yes, this was a 67 rear. It was 5/8 of an inch narrow on each side.
And because I think I told you it was out of a 68 is what I was told, but we didn't know for sure.
Correct.
So you bought it from a guy who bought it from a guy who bought it from a guy.
Correct. So with that being said, I needed to have the final width the same as a 68-72. So
right. Otherwise, my tires would be into my frame.
Yes. So I had to spare as much axle tube as I could because I actually needed to gain a little bit of width to get back to where we were.
Yep.
Normally I take This here is part of the housing end. I normally slice this so it's flush, weld this right to the tube, but I needed that to make all this, to get the width I wanted. Otherwise, we're going to be too narrow.
Yeah, and the axles wouldn't work either. Then the axles would be sticking out too far, and the brakes wouldn't work.
Right.
Wow, that's amazing. And how did you figure out that this was a 67 axle?
I couldn't really read the date so much, but once I measured it, I realized, okay, because obviously I have that one right there. That's an actual 1970.
Okay.
And just a quick measure of the two, it's like, okay, this is a narrower one.
Okay, date code and measuring it. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yep.
So there's the bearing retainer, and you've got the axle. The first thing when you pulled that thing out, I was like, Lord, that thing's massive.
It's a 33 spline.
And that refers to the number of splines there, right?
Yep.
More is generally better and stronger,
yes.
right?
It's much thicker. And then here's your big bearing that we're going to run.
Nice.
Yep. Everything about this is robust.
Yeah.
And then you wanted to run a typical 7/16 stud, but they're slightly longer to accommodate the thicker rear disc rotor hat.
Awesome. And there's a hole in that. And I asked you, what's a hole for?
Access hole, so when you bolt these on, you can use this.
Very smart.
It's just good to have. It's good to have.
And we'll get to see how you put that together even
So, we're out here in the dark and the rain. We didn't have anything else to do, so we thought we'd put an axle together in the cold dark rain.
That beautiful. That cover is so beautiful. That's so nice and pretty. I was gonna say, at least my car will have one shiny painted part on it now.
Oh, it'll have.
Yeah.
Once you're done, you'll have more stuff.
What do you have back here, by the way? What is that behind us?
What's that?
These two axles.
Oh, that, like I said, that's a 70 12-volt Chevy, and the other one's just it's a 70 82 Chevy from the Monte Carlo.
So now, if we look at the differential cover here, right, the surrounding bolts, there are 12 bolts on the cover of a 12-volt Chevy, but that's not really what the 12-volt refers to, is it?
It's really the ring gear. These have 12 volts on the ring gear, whereas anyone in the Oldsmobile land knows their 12-volt was just a 12-volt cover that had a 10-volt ring gear.
Okay, so 12-volt does refer to the differential cover, but okay,
yes,
so it's
but
not why it's stronger per se.
Right.
And right now you're tapping the axle bearing housing in is what you're really doing. And the retainer plates are different, you said too, right? Because it depends on how big the bearing is.
Yes, these have a bigger ID to go around the seal like that.
I don't know that I'll be able to show it. Maybe I'll cut in a picture, but the way the factory holds the axle ends in, down at this end, there's a groove, right, after the splines, and there's a little clip that just falls in, and then the clip prevents the axle from coming out. Why is this system better? I know why, but most of my viewers probably do too, but...
Well, because with a C-clip shaft, if you break the shaft...
Anywhere in here.
Anywhere,
anywhere.
Then the whole shaft comes out.
Because then the clip is the only thing holding it in, which only holds in the stub.
Correct. And that's where, back in the day, you had the invention of a C-clip eliminator, which basically was an aluminum clamshell with a bearing pressed onto the shaft. But I choose not to use a C-clip eliminator simply because you're just taking a block of aluminum and bolting it to the housing, and it's not really part of the housing. It's basically you goop it with some RTV. It'll last a while, but at some point it's going to leak because that vertical bond has to hold the weight of the car like this. So after a while, it no matter what, it will leak. I'd rather cut the whole entire end off, put a new housing end on it, and now you have a true bolt-in axle where everything's inside.
And like you got done explaining earlier, you know, that housing end is welded on with the jig, so it's true.
Yes.
Because what you're really trying to do is get 4 circles, right? Because you have the seats for the bearings of the carrier. You get like these 4 circles, concentric, inline, blah, 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 right?
Yes.
So it's not an easy task.
No.
And you were saying that sometimes they look crooked, but they aren't, right?
Yes.
Because the tube end may not be square.
Right. And there's plenty of them that came from the factory that weren't perfectly straight. They weren't building them with a jig back then.
Oh, really? Wow.
I mean, you know, they're fairly close, but this way you're getting it straight.
Awesome.
Yeah, I've had some that looked pretty hideous. But they were, they were straight when I was done. It was kind of an optical illusion. It kind of fooled your eye. You would look at it and say, there is no way that's straight, but it was straight.
And the ring and pinion, by the way, did we choose 350 or
342?
342, that's right, 342. Yep. Great street strip gear.
It's a true track helical gear.
It's made by Eaton, right?
Yes.
Okay.
No clutches, no cones. Basically no wearable parts.
Oh, wow.
Don't have to run additive. It's just straight conventional 85 140 gear oil.
Okay.
Try to make it as simple and maintenance free as possible. Really.
You said a lot of autocross guys like this, the True Track, right? Didn't you say?
Yes.
Because you don't get the chatter when you are turning corners?
They're much quieter when cornering and whatnot, because you don't have clutches trying to disengage.
Got it. So especially for what you knew I was going to do, I'm not a hardcore drag racer. I will drag race it. I drive it more on the street, and I want to go around corners too.
Right. Yes, you can take it down the track. They actually, I run them myself in my cars.
Oh, do you? Okay, great.
And that's another thing. All the years I've done this, I don't just anytime something new comes out, I don't just believe the word and get it. I put everything through the rigors. I put it in my own car.
And that's why I came to you, even though we haven't been, it'd be a lie to say we're friends, but we, I've known you for 20 years through the groups, and, we've associated with each other, and your name comes up all the time, so.
So yeah, anything I install, sell.
I feel like now I could call you a friend.
Anything I install or sell, I've put it through the rigors.
Yes.
Because there has been some stuff that I've tried that I just personally wasn't comfortable with, and so I don't feel comfortable putting it in someone else's axle.
Yeah.
But
this is awesome. It's awesome.
Wow. I like to use a motive gear. I like the way they're machined.
Motive? Okay.
Yep. I like their gears.
And of course you're setting the backlash and blah 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 blah.
Yep.
That's awesome.
I mean, there are other good, U.S. gear is good. You don't want to confuse that with USA Gear. USA Gear is a sister company of Yukon. It's a cheaper line.
Okay.
US Gear is its own company, and you'll have other axle manufacturers like Moser, Strange. They'll use a motor or a US Gear. They'll use an upper shelf gear.
Okay.
Even Motive, they have a cheaper line. I use the higher end line. It comes in a black and orange box. Mm-hmm. The economy line comes in a black and blue box.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty much every gear manufacturer has like an upper and lower line of gear.
Okay. You even changed the pinion yoke. Is that what it's called?
Yes, it's a Strange 1350. It's a steel yoke with a big thicker U-bolts.
Yeah, look at these things are massive. If I can compare the U-bolts.
Yeah, just for example, there's that one.
I guess if you can see my finger next to it, and versus these, how thin they are.
But the U-joint itself is the cap is bigger and they're wider and further apart.
Ah, okay.
So, because our plan is...
Wow, look at that. That's crazy. I don't know if you guys can tell, my fingers fit in between there. My fingers do not fit in between, or barely fit in between them. They're definitely larger. That's awesome. That's awesome. So, the Chevy 12 bolt, is it an 8 7/8 inch, 8.875 inch ring gear?
8.875 is how they kind of classify it.
And what part of it is 8 7/8? Center to center of the holes, or the outer diameter? Or?
The outer diameter of the ring gear. Diameter of the ring gear.
Largest part of it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So then you have a step down from the Chevy 12 bolt is what? Next lower down in strength? Oldsmobile or BLP 12 bolt?
It would be in 1971 GM came out with the 8510 bolt. That's one of the best rears ever made.
Wait. This is what, the 70?
71 and up. General Motors came out with an 8510 bolt.
That's that good?
Came in. It didn't come in Chevy. There's rumor that Pontiac started putting them at the very end of '72.
Same. Are you talking about the same thing came in the G bodies? The 442s?
Yeah, what later came in the G bodies.
Okay. But what about the was it BOP 12 volt? There's another 12 volt.
Yes, there's a 12 volt O axle.
Okay.
That came in '67 to '70 Cutlass and 442.
Okay. Oldsmobile only.
Oldsmobile only, or at least that's what they originally came in.
Uh-huh.
Obviously, you can see them under other cars now because they've been swapped.
Those are strong too.
Those are a good rear. The only downside is there's very limited aftermarket support.
Got it.
There's only, Richmond makes a 342 and a 390, and that's it. Yukon makes a posi unit. But they are a good rear. They're a bolt-in axle. There's no C-clips.
Okay.
It's just one of those things where you're very limited on gear selection.
So you don't have to do this to get the...
No.
Oh, they already come with the axles that don't.
Right.
Okay.
And
that's
then,
good design.
in 1971, they started the 8.5 10-bolt. And then it also became known as the 10-bolt corporate or the 8.5 corporate. And they started putting it, by the mid-70s, they were putting it in, Camaros and half-ton trucks.
If you put the right center section in the right, the carrier, right ring and pinion, good axles, how fast in the quarter mile do you think? What's the braking limit of a 8.5 inch 10 bolt?
I have 8.5s. There's actually one here. I did it probably 12, 15 years ago. That car goes 920s.
Oh my
8.5.
God.
I have one of these that's gone 830s.
Wow.
In a big 74.
No kidding. Okay.
So they both have great potential.
I never knew that the 8.5s were that strong.
Yes. Yeah, wow. They can be built even in stock form. If you just took a bone stock 8.5,
which that can be good to know because these housings are getting harder to find and more expensive.
Yes, they
right?
are.
Okay.
Yes, they are.
I mean, I paid $600 for this housing, and what did we use? We didn't use the ring pinion.
Right.
We didn't use the carrier only, and so I mean that was not a bad deal. That was a decent deal, right? Yeah. I didn't overpay.
Because even when I buy a 12-volt Chevy core to build, I try and have between $500 and $600 into it because again, by the time I do all my stuff to it, now I have X into it.
Yep.
So, I don't want to. I'm not going to spend $1,000 for a core when all I'm going to use is the housing and caps. Because if I'm going to do that,
caps meaning the main bearing caps, right?
Bearing caps, yes. Because if I have too much into it when I start, by the time I'm done with it, I could have just went and bought a Moser 12 housing or a 9-inch housing or something like that.
Now, what about building a 12 volt or 8.5 inch 10 bolt versus a 9-inch? Seems like a lot of people that have money to blow go to the 9-inch. Is it necessary, or what's the downside?
It's kind of like the common escape. Like, I'm just going to buy a 9-inch, and that's fine. But it's just like gear sets and everything else. There's entry level to everything. You'll look up somewhere and it'll say, complete 9-inch, blah blah blah. But it says prices start at. Well, that's your basic. That's enough to get you into a 9-inch. The center section is decent. It's not the best. I mean, because I built a 9-inch, and I mean my center section, just the center section was almost $4,000.
Oh my God.
So I mean,
oh my God.
There's levels to that too. And then obviously with a 9-inch, you can put a back brace on it. You can do this. You can do that.
Wow. 9-inch is going to be more. Period.
Right.
Okay.
If, some people, they just like to pick up a phone to some of these mail order places. Hey, this is what I want.
Right.
And that's great.
Wow.
But it also depending on what you get with it or how much you're spending. I've seen those break too because they're getting the basic.
Right.
The basic parts. They're getting the basic differential, the basic center section, all that stuff. Whereas, like I said, the one I mentioned before, that'll handle 1,200, 1,500 horsepower.
Wow.
So, like I said, there's levels to this stuff.
Right.
And it all depends on what you want. I don't want to build something that's just good enough. I do want to overbuild it.
Yeah.
Because everything I build and I ship out, I don't want to ever see it again.
Right.
If I see it again, it means something's wrong with it.
Right.
I don't want to see it again.
Right.
I've been building these for what, 27 years.
And the red bushings are polyurethane bushings,
Yes.
right? Which are going to limit. I had those in my 8.5 inch in my '86 Cutlass. It made the rear end very solid feeling. You know, you didn't have wheel hop and a lot of that kind of stuff. That's pretty standard issue for a street car, right?
Yes.
So for a race car, you might use solid bushings, right?
Yes. I like, it's just something better than OEM rubber.
Yeah.
There's just too much deflection, and you gotta have something stiffer.
Can you show us the 8.2 real quick and talk about what the 8.2 is? 8.2 inch. It's the tall upper one, right?
So this is just dumping oil out of it right now, but this is an 8.2 Chevy.
And I'll show a picture of the cover here. I'll cut in.
Yeah, this is an 8.2 Chevy. This is a C-clip one. It was out of a 1970 Monte Carlo.
Mm-hmm.
Decent street rear. It's not something I would build for big power or especially a torque motor.
Because it's 8.2 inch ring gear, you're limited on the strength, right?
Everything is very small.
And you're probably limited on parts availability because people don't build them.
Yes, and when you start talking about the pause units, you have to think of it this way. That pause unit is like a cylinder.
Okay.
And you can only fit so much into that cylinder. So the cylinder's smaller because the ring gear is smaller. And you can the side gears and spider gears can only be so big because you have to fit it in there. So with all that stuff being smaller, every little thing it can't take as much load as,
gotcha.
You know, you're trying to just distribute all this power on a smaller surface.
I mean, it would be almost as much to build an 8.2 as it would be in 12 volt.
Yes, I mean, if you go to order parts, you're going to spend about the same for a posi, same for ring and pinion.
So why would you put money into it?
Right. If it's just a cruiser, like this,
or maybe you wanted the originality for some reason.
This particular one, it's the original one to the guy's car.
That makes sense. Now that makes sense.
He's not racing it. It's a cruiser. It's a corner carver.
So this will be stronger than he ever needs, and it'll be original.
He just wants to put a decent gear in it. We're not getting crazy with shafts. We're not,
Right.
He just wants to drive it. It's
that
just
makes sense.
like a distance driver. So that'll work. Yeah, he's one of those people, like, he doesn't need to go buy a 9-inch because it's just not practical for what he's doing.
Right. One of the tougher things if you're a novice at this is probably identifying what you're really getting, right? And making sure you're...
Yes,
isn't there one of them that has a 12 bolt cover that's not a 12 bolt?
The 12 bolt O axle has a 12 bolt cover with a 10 bolt ring gear, and that does get confused with some people.
Oh, for Oldsmobile, right?
Correct.
What did the Buicks and Pontiacs use in their high end late 60s, early 70s?
All the Buicks used an 8.2 BOP 10 bolt.
Really? Hang on. Buicks never came with the heavy duty axle?
No.
Wow.
No. Some of the GTOs were optional to have a 12 volt Chevy.
Okay.
But Buick, they used just a 8.2. Buick from 68 to 70, Buick did come out with their own 8.2. It was actually quite an amazing piece. They made it had a really big pinion bearing. It had an offset kind of like a 9-inch.
Mm-hmm.
It had a bigger driver's side carrier bearing and a smaller one on the passenger side.
Weird.
And they were actually a very stout piece. But see, there again, there's no aftermarket parts for them. So they're kind of a dead rear unless you have parts.
Wow.
But the only Buick and Pontiac, or the only Buick and Oldses that came with a 12 volt Chevy were the ones built in Canada.
Say that one more time.
The 68, 69, like Skylark GS, and 68, 69 Cutlass 442s that were built in Canada came with a 12 volt Chevy.
Really? You could get a Chevy 12 volt in an Oldsmobile?
Yes.
Okay.
Everything up in Canada came with a 12 volt Chevy.
No kidding.
The ones made in the U.S. had the Oldsmobiles had the 12 volt O axle, and the Buicks had the 8.2.
Is it true a 9-inch Ford has saps more power? Takes more torque or more power?
Yeah, and there's been numerous tests and shootouts and all this stuff. The 9-inch versus the 12 volt Chevy versus like even the Dana 60. The Dana 60, they claim it takes more power at the top end. The 9-inch, it's more at the bottom. yada yada yada.
Dana 60 is what the heavy duty version that Dodge has had, right?
Yeah, it's an ignorant piece. It's really cool. I like them.
Yeah.
I've just never had the need to have one.
Right.
Because the rears I build, I haven't found the limit to them.
Wow.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, and there are some of the racers and stuff like stay with an 8.5 10 bolt or a 12 volt Chevy just simply because they're lighter weight.
Mm-hmm.
You're
Gotcha.
less power to turn it. If you remember Dave Lauer's 74 Olds,
Yeah.
that has a 12 volt Chevy in it.
Wow.
And that big thing had a 12 volt Chevy.
That was a 74 Olds Cutlass that was going, was it high 8s in the quarter mile?
Yeah, 8. I think the fastest it went was 832.
That's like 1,200 horsepower, wasn't it, with nitrous? Yeah.
Something.
Oh.
But lo and behold, if you looked underneath it, was there a 9-inch in it?
Nope.
It was
Nice.
a 12 volt Chevy. There's actually a Mopar guy here that has a pretty fast CUDA, and it's kind of funny, but it has a 12 volt Chevy underneath
No
it.
way.
And one of the reasons was because it was lighter and used less power,
Gotcha.
versus like a Dana 60 or the Mopar 8 3/4. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I just learned. Hang on.
We're just taking a crash course in axle
Yeah.
on a dark rainy night.
Yeah. Get another walk around of this thing, man.
In
It's so
Pennsylvania.
beautiful. Yeah. Learned a ton about rear axles today.
This fin cover, by the way it came from the factory in the Oldsmobiles, I mean, it has the look, this center section, like there's one brand, was it Hildebrand? Has
Yeah, it was,
center
quick change.
quick change ring. It's supposed to look like that, but was there any function to this cover?
It holds an extra half quart of fluid, so you have 2 whole quarts of fluid in it, and obviously just being aluminum, it kind of dissipates heat a little bit.
Okay. This is actually aluminum?
Yes.
Is it? Okay. I had one on my 8.5 corporate, and aftermarket, it was zinc. It was,
Yeah,
it was heavy. So, okay.
But yeah, the parts place sells one that's drilled for a 12 volt Chevy. That's where I had to get this.
Got it. Very cool.
Because obviously the pattern's different.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. I can't wait to get this thing in the car.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Hey.
I appreciate your
Thank
time
you.
and all your information. And I'm going to put in the description if you want to get a hold of Brian. I'm going to put all his information here in the description below.
All right, thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it brought you some value. Now, I trust Brian, and I know he knows a ton about axles, but I can't verify everything as far as every, production year or this axle never came in that. So there could be some details that you might think are off. If you think they are, please be civil and post it in the comments below. But otherwise, I hope this brought you some value, and thank you so much for watching. Keep following along. You'll see here fairly soon, sometime between now and the spring of 2024, this axle is going to go in the car along with a new engine.